If I'm going to work out if my drawings have improved, then obviously I need to have some drawings. So however I keep them, wherever I keep them, I need to have a good rummage and a good look, and I need to find some drawings from whatever the earliest part of the time period I'm wanting to consider. Have I improved to my latest drawings? So that's the first thing. I need to find a representative number of drawings that I can look at relatively easily. It's a little more complicated if they're all in sketchbooks because it can be harder to compare them side by side, which is what we're wanting to do, at least with some of them. But next, get a range of drawings that are preferably of a similar sort of subject because they're going to be easier to compare. And if we're going to work out have we been improving in our drawing or not, then we're going to be looking at and comparing our drawings. Preferably one of the very last ones we've done in this subject and one of the earlier ones we've done. By having a similar subject in each of our comparison drawings, we're going to have more points of commonality to compare, which should help us come to a clearer decision faster. Now, this next step may not be possible or only partially possible depending what you've kept, but if it can all be managed, to attach our original reference photos to our drawings so that we can see what we were working from and use that to also see what we achieved can be helpful. This is a good reason to, where we have a hard copy photo, to keep it. A very helpful thing to do at the end of the process I'm going to continue outlining in a moment is to keep one of these original references and the original drawing that we did some time ago, and to put that drawing away and to redraw the reference at a similar size and using the same materials, and then to make that comparison to see exactly how our drawing has developed. Not just techniques with the pen, but also the way we view a reference, understand it, and want to translate it, and the marks we use to translate it with onto the paper. I did this myself not that long ago, and at the end of this video, I'll show you the reference, my original drawing, and we'll compare it with my more recent version of the same scene. But first, here are 5 things we can look at in each of the drawings that we've chosen to see how have things changed. And it can be particularly helpful to compare the first and the last of our series. So here is one of my first architecture drawings when I started making YouTube videos, and here is one of my most recent ones. The most obvious way things have changed is I'm drawing smaller now. That's partly because that works better, I discovered, for making YouTube videos. But I also came to understand that starting and completing a drawing is a learning cycle. That's the context that we learn things about drawing in. And if I draw smaller, I complete my drawing in less time, and that lets me learn the lessons that we learn each drawing at a faster rate. And the first thing to ask is, have I become more accurate in what I draw? Now, by accuracy, I'm talking of things like the angles, the scale, the proportions. What's my accuracy of keeping things in proportion, keeping the same scale consistent throughout the whole drawing? And there's a very easy way to check this. If we just look at my earliest drawing, if I want to look at from the top of the spire to this corner, that's about this distance here. It's from a bit below this to there is the same as here to here. So if I compare that in mind, so from there to there, and we can see that it's very different. This clearly tells me that the lower part of my spire, of my tower, is too short in relation to the height of the spire part of it. I can check my angles. And that one is not steep enough. This one is better. If I look at this window, in proportion to this wall that it's on, it's pretty obvious that my window is too large. It's also easy to see after the event that the part of the tower that these windows are on is too short. If I look at this section here, it's taller and thinner in proportion than it is here. So my proportions are out. I've got it too high for the width compared to my original. So these are the sorts of ways we can check the proportions. Let's just do the same thing with my more recent drawing. Let's take from the top to this section here, and that's about the same as from that section to that corner. So from here to here, and that looks pretty okay. Let's look at my width. If I go from, I'll do it on the reference first. If I go from the side of the building to this part here that the wall comes out, it's that. And if I compare that to this, it sort of takes me from there to there is the same as from here to here. So I go from here to here on my drawing, and then I go above, and yep, that from there to there, that lines up pretty well. So my proportions here seem to be happier than in my drawing of a few years earlier. So that's great. My second thing to consider is, have I captured a sense of realism, assuming that's what I'm wanting to do, better? That sort of bundles up together all the individual drawing techniques that I'm using for their combined overall effect, and thinking, has it worked? Do I feel that this feels more realistic than this? I certainly do. I find this has a very heavy outline feel to it because my focus at the time was on trying to be accurate with the shapes. Although not as accurate as I hope to be, we've since discovered. Whereas here, I've been able to combine whatever techniques I've learned to capture a stronger sense of realism. So what about our line work then? Has there been a change in the way our line work looks, in the confidence, in the accuracy, in the suitability of it? And that's where I think there's been a significant change for me. This line work is all very similar. Because my focus was on accuracy, I wasn't thinking of effect, and I was using line work pretty much to outline shapes. Several years later, I'm actually more conscious of the overall effect. I'm conscious of the fact that how heavily, how clearly we draw our lines affects the overall appearance. And by varying these, we can create different effects and hopefully an effect that's more realistic. The next area is, are there trouble areas? Are there particularly difficult areas? And am I able to deal with those areas better now? And for me, a troublesome area was where the building hits the ground. As you can see, I dealt with it very effectively here by leaving it out completely. Well, I no longer leave it out unless I feel it's really to the benefit of the drawing, and I presume I'm going to be including at least some of the clutter at street level, which can make it a difficult area to draw, as well as things such as uneven ground levels. All of this I avoided here. The next area to consider are lights and darks. But unfortunately, in these particular drawings, values are not a strong part. There's not a great deal of darkness and grey scale created, just the fairly black behind the windows effect. But if there were more values, particularly a greater range of grayscale, then that's something to consider when we compare the two. Has the handling of that improved in the later drawing? But if for a minute I look at a different subject matter, I can see that my development has been to go from perhaps starker contrast to a more subtle contrast. And in my line work, to go from a more heavy-handed approach to something that's more sensitive to the underlying forms and to creating clarity in our scene. You'll notice I've made some effort at ground level here that I left out there. I've used hatching to represent the colour as well as the lights and darks in a way that I haven't with this one. And I've got darker, stronger marks here on the parts of this tree that come towards us and therefore are closer. And I have a lighter series of marks and effect on this top silhouette, which is actually further away from us than this part of the canopy. I haven't done this here. I've changed my marks, but I haven't changed the weight of my lines, which tends to make this look flattish, and therefore it competes with the more three-dimensional effect that I'm creating with my hatching within the canopy. Learning to make all our marks, wherever they are, work together for the one aim, the one visual aim in our drawing, is a great way to advance the sense of realism that we draw with. Let's now look at, I think, my earliest YouTube demo drawing and a much later, several years later, version of the same scene. It's this Edinburgh Street scene. As we saw in the earlier drawings, there is a heavy reliance on an even, quite heavy outline approach. And sadly, the tower, the upper half, leans to the left. And again, we see a neglect of ground level details, leaving out details that in context might have been interesting to put in, very stylized figures, and a great simplification of some of the architectural details that are on the front down here. How does this compare with a redraw 2.5 years later? My second drawing is slightly larger, so we'll just slide them up so we can see the base of both of them. If you look at ground level, you can see I have drawn the car. I have still simplified things. I took away this barrier, this closest element, as well as this closer taxi. Feeling it brought all the attention down here for no gain. And I simplified this area here. I also added a figure closer just to increase the depth of plane. I made far more effort to suggest the effective detail that we have here on the facade. And I continued the drawing past the actual subject to give it a bit of context. Varying my line weight, lightening my line and basically creating the effective distance as I went down the street. My figures, I think, make a little more effort to look human, and I think the overall effect of my line work on the building is lighter. I've also made some effort to show that this is made of stonework as opposed to a smooth surface. All of those drawing the effective detail videos I hope have paid off for me as well. For the actual spires, the tops, I think in this one, my spire is too wide. From memory, what happened was I actually got it off center. So I had to add lines to each side to try and make the center look more centered. So that was a compromise I chose to make for the overall, I thought, good of the drawing. The other problem with my newer drawing is that this wall comes out too far in proportion to this wall compared to my reference. So from there to there is much wider than from there to there, but in my drawing, from here to here is much closer to the same width than it should be. This should probably have finished about here, is my guess. Part of my problem was that this line wasn't straight as I wanted, and so I had to push it out this way to make it wider, and then I had to widen this part. So they were the best choices in a bad situation, but it did make this part less accurate than here. But overall, very happy with the development of my drawing technique, and particularly that I'm now much more prepared to not leave out parts that I feel are going to be difficult or complex or possibly I won't do well, but that I only leave out things or rearrange them because I think compositionally that will give me a better drawing. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. If we're doing a course, if we have a class teacher, then they can give us the input that we need to know have I improved or not. But if I'm on a self-taught journey, then I need to work that out myself as well. And it is important because it firstly encourages me. Every gain is a gain. Every improvement shows that I'm heading in a good direction, at least in that aspect of my drawing. And this also helps me identify weak areas where perhaps now, as in my case, At the time, I was focused on one thing, which meant I wasn't seeing the weaknesses in my line work in this drawing. But I can see that at some stage, or probably more likely gradually over a couple of years, I began to shift my expectations, my understanding, and that let me push for things that I didn't even see as possible or necessary at the start. And that's helpful because it doesn't just encourage me, but it gives me direction to where I can continue to push into my drawing techniques and to continue to use them and develop them for greater and greater effect, for whatever overall effect I want to have at the end of my drawing. Make sure you've got some way of identifying when you drew your drawings. It can be as simple as a little pencil date on the back or at the bottom, something you can remove later should you want to. So I hope you can have some productive fun rummaging through your old drawings and old reference photos. But remember, whatever you find, have fun doing so. I'll see you next video. Bye.